And we're back like we never left. Oregon fans, what's going on? How we living? Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. Glad to have you along here on a Monday morning, Monday afternoon, March 18th, 2024, coming to you from Long Beach, California. We're going to be talking some Oregon spring football today, but we're also going to take a little bit of a different approach and do a broader Big Ten focus and talk a little bit about the Washington Huskies and what things are looking like over on Montlake under new head coach Jedd Fisch, because we know Oregon and Washington are tied at the hip with their rivalry, which will now go to the Big Ten Conference in 2024. Joining me to break it all down is Roman Tomashoff. He is the editor of Huskies Wire over on the USA Today network, covering the Washington Huskies, and he's the co-host of the Locked On Huskies podcast. Roman, it's been a minute, man. How the heck are you? Thank you so much for being here.
Max, I'm doing great. It's great to see you. Great to be here. I'm so excited to be a part of this. Thank you so much for reaching out. And no, I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm good, man. I'm good. Pretty nice and like sunny day here in Long Beach, as you can probably see. My lighting's kind of
Oh
been an
yeah.
ongoing battle, but we're looking all right so far. Got my workout in, getting the day going right.
There we
So
go.
no complaints on my end, man. And then we got some pressers from the weekend, so we got a little bit more to talk about as far as Oregon goes. So no complaints, man. We're gonna hop in here and waste no time, as one of Oregon's highest recruits in recent classes, Jurion Dickey, former five-star wide receiver, heads into his second year in Eugene, and he is drawing some praise in spring football. The Ducks have held 2 of their 15 spring practices. Now we all know they are going on a break until April 2nd, and then it is all gas, no breaks until the spring game on April 27th. But Roman, I wanted to talk about Jurion because there's this perception, I think, with fans that when you see that 5-star rating, you always expect them to see the field early, make a big impact, whatever it is. But it takes time. And that was really kind of at the essence and the core of what Will Stein, Oregon's offensive coordinator, had to say about Dickey over the weekend. And the short version of it is that he's saying, hey, it takes time to get comfortable. He had to learn the system. Now he knows where he needs to line up, what routes to run. And to that effect, he's healthy. We know that he had an injury his senior year of high school that kind of bled over into the start of his Oregon career. So he's healthy, he's in shape, and he's more or less the player that we expected him to be. So based on everything we heard from Stein, I think that Jurion Dickey is definitely going to be a name in that wide receiver rotation.
Oh, absolutely. And that's somebody you want to keep an eye on anyways, of course, after, Troy Franklin departs for the NFL draft. And you're absolutely right. It does take some time, no matter who you are, unless, you want to look at guys like Orlando Pace, who just, plop right in at Ohio State and play left tackle for 3 years and then go off to the Hall of Fame. Like, it'd be great if every 5-star recruit was like that, but that's just not the way it works. So I really liked his film coming out of high school. And it's something where I would expect him to step into a much bigger role this year. And, I've heard a lot from just Big Ten fans saying, oh, Washington, Oregon, USC, UCLA, they don't know what they're in for with the Big Ten. But I think to a certain extent, you can go the other direction with that as well, where, the passing attack that Oregon had last year, the same thing about Washington, USC, where some of the offenses that they've put on films, I don't know if the Big Ten knows exactly what they're going to be getting in some of these high octane offenses out West.
And the thing about Dickey that's really cool is he was a really athletic, really physical receiver when I covered him coming out of high school. He was at Valley Christian, and then he transferred to Menlo Atherton, where coincidentally Troy Franklin played his high school ball. So for him, I think there's a lot of opportunity this year, because if you're just looking at the numbers, I think it was something like 80 catches that Troy Franklin had. I know Tez Johnson led the team and set a new record for a single season receptions, but you have those receptions that Troy frees up, and then Bucky Irving, he caught like 50 plus passes out of the backfield as well. So there's definitely some catches to go around in this 2024 offense for Oregon. But that said, there are some talented veterans that Dickey is contending with in that wide receiver room. You have Trayshawn Holden, who came back for one more year. You have Tez Johnson, who came back for one more year. Just some other names there at the wide receiver spot. Kyler Casper is back, and he is someone that was really highly touted coming in. He reclassed from 23 to 22, but we haven't seen a whole lot of him. Gary Bryant Jr. So there's a lot of names there. And then Ryan Pelham and Jeremiah McClellan are the blue chip All-Americans that they signed in the 24 class, Dylan Gresham. So there's so many names, so much talent
Right.
there, but but it seems like he's doing all of the right things. Jurion is to put his best foot forward. I know that Stein also mentioned that the bowl prep was really a good time for him to just hammer down those fundamentals, and now he said that he's taken balls off of defenders' heads with a lot of these 50-50 balls or whatever it is. So I think that's one of the most encouraging and most promising storylines that you can have coming out of spring ball, even though they're only 2 practices in. But based on what Will Stein had to say, the arrow is certainly trending up for Dickey, it seems.
And that's what you like to hear. And, I'll comp this in the best way that I can, which is to Washington, what we saw last season, where, you can look at their top 3 of Rome Odunze, Jalen McMillan, and Jalen Polk. And you can just say, because you can look at that in a similar light, right? Where you talk about what Tez Johnson did last year, what Trayshawn Holden did last year outside of Troy Franklin. And that was kind of the similar situation with somebody that I'm really high on this year, where he was not even close to the same caliber of recruit in Denzel Boston, but he was somebody who came in, made a lot of plays throughout fall camp last year. Took him a little bit of time to get acclimated after, he played a little bit in 22 as a true freshman, but you look for that progression. And that's all that you can ask for with some of these guys, because, you talk about that 5-star rating, and you're right. Every fan says, oh, that's a 5-star. That kid needs to come in and play right away, be a star, or else why are they here? What's going on? But you have to remember, these kids are 16, 17, 18 years old. So it takes them some time to adjust to the college level. And a lot of times it's, oh, well, I was the best player at my high school in X, Y amount of seasons. Obviously, following Troy Franklin is no easy act at Menlo Atherton. But when you're doing that for so long, it takes a little bit of time to get adjusted to the college game. So you can't necessarily complain about Jurion taking some time last year to adjust. And I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up as, wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 in terms of catches and yards this season for that team.
The last thing I want to say about Dickey before we get into a little bit of Huskies talk, that's why I brought you on, obviously, Roman. It's kind of wild to think about when you look at Oregon in recent years. I think that the caliber of player that they're recruiting at the position has drastically increased, and that really goes back to Brian McClendon, who's now the wide receiver coach of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He was at Oregon, got a cup of coffee in Miami to follow Mario Cristobal, and then he went over to Georgia. But the wide receiver play at Oregon has been really good, and you're starting to get better recruits in, but it's not necessarily a school, even though it's been kind of right around the top of the sport. They're not winning national championships, obviously, but they've been in the thick of the conversation, certainly within like the top 10. It's not really a school that's known for prolific wide receiver play. Heck, before Troy Franklin, Dylan Mitchell was the last 1,000-yard receiver, and I think that was in 2018 or 2019. I think it was 2018 when they went to the Red Box Bowl. What a brutal game that was to watch against Michigan State. I think it was a 7-6 final, but it's positive to hear this development on the wide receiver front for Oregon, but it's just crazy to compare it to the past. And we haven't really seen a lot of, high end wide receivers come through Oregon. And the next step is having not just one Troy Franklin, but having multiple studs. And that's kind of the direction that Oregon got themselves going in with Tez Johnson having the year that he had.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something where that's what you want to see as college football evolves, right? Where, you just look around and you look at Alabama a couple of years ago. You look at just some of these other teams at LSU now too, and what they were in 2019, 2020, where it's not that level, right? I'm not comparing that, but it shows that you need multiple top end wide receivers to get really far at this point in time. Look at what Washington did this past season with 3 guys that are going to hear their names called the top 3 rounds of the draft. That's really what it takes. And, it took a little while for Oregon to come around on that because they had such a, that hard-nosed style under Mario Cristobal for a while. But it's nice to see them adapting and getting to just this next level of college football, because it really is important. And as, both these schools head into the Big Ten and head into the 14-team college football playoff now, you want to find every possible way you can to compete, and multiple high-end wide receivers are a really, really good way to get there.
The Ducks have the roster to do just that, to have multiple guys you can go to at any given time, some guys that can play a variety of roles for you. And I think that there's another reason with Junior Adams and the work that he's done. That's another reason to be confident in what Oregon's going to be able to do moving forward at the position. But let's switch it up a little bit. Let's talk some Washington Huskies and Oregon and how this rivalry is going over to the Big Ten here in 2024. I know that I wanted to just take a bit of a broader focus, and you do a tremendous job, and you know this team well, so I wanted to bring you on to get a little bit of the rivals' perspective, if you will. Tell us a little bit about what the early kind of response or maybe some of your takeaways have been from Jedd Fisch getting the keys to the car following Kalen DeBoer's departure to run that program up in Montlake.
Yeah, so I know we haven't spoken since then. It's been a real whirlwind just kind of since that happened where, I'm down there in Houston and it's like, all right, yeah, this is really promising. There's gonna be so much going on. And then 4 days later, Washington's looking for a new coach. So I obviously you don't want to compare Kalen DeBoer and Jedd Fisch. But when I look around and you kind of look through what Washington and athletic director Troy Dannon could have done in the wake of the Kalen DeBoer era, this was really the best possible hire that Washington could have made. Because, I've seen people point to Jedd's career record of 17 or 21 saying, oh, you want a guy who can't even get above 500? When let's just take a step back and look at the broader picture of what he did at Arizona. He took a 1-win team and made him into a top 10 team in the country within 3 seasons. Now he's going to be starting in a much better place than he was at Arizona. We saw him bring a whole lot of talented guys with him. We saw him bring Jonah Coleman, which is going to give Washington one of the best running back duos in the Big Ten between Jonah Coleman and Cameron Davis, who's going to be back healthy for spring ball. He brought in Ephesians Prysock, who's going to be a top-tier corner. But what I've been really impressed with personally is the way he's been selling the NFL and the way he's just one of the social media things that UW has been doing this offseason is calling themselves the 33rd NFL team. And a lot of that is credit to Jedd Fisch, who's worked with so many NFL teams over, his long football career. But let's go out and look at some of the hires he made, because one of the first things he told us at his introductory press conference is one of the reasons I made this move is because of the assistant coach pool and because of just all the resources that I'm going to have available to me. One of the things you and I discussed right before we jumped on here. And he said, I have to go. I now have the resources and ability to go out and hire whoever I want. And whoever he wanted was Steve Belichick. And as a Patriots fan, I'm nerding out for so many reasons because of that. But just as a pure football guy, this is an incredible hire because the Patriots do so many different things schematically. And on defense, it is probably the closest thing you can look at to what the best defense in college football was last year in the Michigan Wolverines, when it's so multiple. You ask so many guys to do so many different things. They'll show one thing pre-snap, do another thing post, not in terms of a disguise, but just in terms of I'm going to line up here and I'm going to do a totally different job than what you expect me to. And it probably, we don't know what the terms of the contract was, but it definitely wasn't cheap to hire Steve Belichick away from the New England Patriots. And it's just really exciting to see that Jedd Fisch is utilizing all of his NFL connections to the best of his ability and has brought in some really talented players as well.
We're talking with Roman Romashoff about Washington and Oregon's rivalry, heading to the Big Ten, taking a closer look at what the start of the Jedd Fisch era looks like here in 2024 over in Seattle. And we're here on the Ducks Dish podcast. If you guys are watching on YouTube or at Oregon Football Max Torres, make sure to do me a favor and hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. And let me know what you think about Oregon football, whether it's Jurion Dickey, who we talked about earlier in the show, or this some of your thoughts on what Washington's been able to do and what's been a pretty difficult spot. Like you mentioned, Roman, just being in the national championship. That game went out and unfolded the way that it did, and then DeBoer goes to Alabama. But to your point about the resources that Fisch has at his disposal now in Seattle, I think that it's something that I was even writing about the other day when Oregon extended Carlos Lachlan, their running backs coach. I think one of the reasons that you have to be confident in this hire if you're a Washington fan is the body of work that Jedd Fisch has and how much experience he has building a staff. When he got handed the keys at Arizona, I mean, it wasn't exactly a powerhouse contending program, but the best coaches know how to build a staff. And then to further that point, they know what to do when guys leave or if they want to leave, and you got to give them a little bit more to kind of sweeten the pot and keep them around. And I think that Fisch has obviously shown that he has that kind of skill in his toolbox.
Oh, absolutely. And that's one of the things where, that's why I wanted to talk about Steve Belichick so much. And that's why that's somebody that I've just harped on over the course of the offseason, because he didn't bring in one coach to the New England Patriots. He brought in two. He brought in Vinny Sunseri to coach the safeties, who spent a bunch of time with the Patriots, was a player and former GA at Alabama, played in the NFL for a couple of seasons. And then the only other coach that he didn't bring with him from his staff at Arizona was linebackers coach Robert Bala, who where did he coach for the season? Oh yeah, that's right. Also Alabama. So he brought in a couple of really high level assistant coaches along with what he assembled at Arizona, which was a fantastic staff that I'm really, really impressed with. And, that encompasses wide receivers coach Kevin Cummings, running back coach Scotty Graham, offensive line coach and offensive coordinator Brendan Carroll. And on the field, it's been one thing, but Max, as you said, he is fantastic at building a staff, and he is taking this to the next level off the field. And, some people call them nepotism hires, but it's also just really promising to have all these people around, where he goes out and hires Jack Del Rio's son, Luke Del Rio, to be an offensive analyst. He goes out and hires John Lynch's son, Jake Lynch, to be a defensive analyst. He goes out and hires one of his former players in Caleb Wilson, who played for him at UCLA, played in the NFL for a little while. He's gone out and hired so many top level analysts off the field that you just look at this Washington staff top to bottom. And I don't want to say it's the best in the country, because there are a whole lot of fantastic staffs around, but it has to be talked about as one of the best in terms of what he was able to put together in just a couple of months. And it's really been impressive to see.
So Steve Belichick comes over from New England via the Patriots to head up that Washington defense, and that kind of brings an interesting question to my mind, Roman, and it really gets at the identity of this Washington team, because it's kind of been I wouldn't say all over the place, but under Jimmy Lake and then Chris Peterson before him, I think that it was really this defensive kind of powerhouse. Like they were known for producing a lot of high end DBs, and then just a lot of really well coached guys that maybe didn't have crazy careers, but they were solid in the NFL. And then DeBoer comes in, and they're the talk of offense more or less in college football with what they were able to do with Michael Penix and obviously those wide receivers. So what do you think the identity is of this Washington team right now, and what does it maybe project to be once Jedd Fisch gets this thing going?
That's a really good question, because this is the perfect happy medium of, when you look at what the numbers were last year on offense for Arizona, they were still one of the top 10, 15 teams in the country, but they also had one of the country's best run defenses and were really good in the secondary as well when you look at what Ephesians Prysock and Tacardo Davis did back there. So it really is a really good all-around team. So I think that the identity is one of the things that you pointed out first was well coached. This is going to be a very, very well-coached team, but I think it's going to pride itself on trying to be a really balanced NFL-style team, from the sense of, Jedd Fisch has talked about how his inspiration for his offensive scheme is a mix of Kyle Shanahan and Sean McVay, two guys that he's worked with in the past, where that's something you really like to see from just when you look at both those offenses. It's a nice mix of running the ball, a lot of emphasis on play action, mobile quarterbacks who can make plays out of structure, where you can see that. But then when we look at just some of the offers they've made on defense, I think that they're gearing up to try to be one of the best teams in the country in the secondary once again. Where you look at how hard they're pushing for guys like Dijon Lee, they're able to secure an official visit from top 50 player Anquan Fagans from Alabama, and just with some of the other offers that they've made in the secondary, they're pushing hard for Adonis Curry out of Quartz Hill. There are a bunch of just players in the secondary where it just seems to be like that's one of the biggest focuses of this class of 2025. And it just seems like they're going to build their defense back to front, where they're going to have a really solid secondary. And then it's going to come down to stopping the run and rushing the passer after that, where, you don't necessarily want to say one is better than the other. But when you look at the old school Washington, staking their claim for DBU, that it seemed like a very solid way to build a defense for a long time.
And just to bounce it to Oregon a little bit for a second here, Roman, I think Oregon's kind of the inverse to a degree as far as the defense goes. I think they're starting front to back with Dan Lanning. He knows that they really need to win at the point of attack, and they're bringing in some great edge rushers. Elijah Rushing, a 5-star. He might have lost his 5-star, actually. I don't know. No, he was a 5-star, excuse me, in the 2024 class out of Arizona. And then you got Jordan Birch, who really looks like a different player, or someone who's at least gone to that next level after coming over from South Carolina. And Oregon kind of feels like maybe that it's at a happy medium identity wise between offense and defense. But I think as Lanning continues to get these caliber of players and develop them, coach them to the NFL level, we're going to see it go back to more defense. Although Will Stein is doing everything he can to say, hey, wait, don't forget about the offense now after producing a Heisman finalist in 2024. But just to kind of get it back to Washington real quick here. Now that Oregon's going to the Big Ten with Washington, I feel like they're not really being discussed too much in terms of, those top tier programs heading into next season. You're hearing a lot about Oregon and Ohio State, and Michigan's going to be in the thick of it, even though they're moving on from Jim Harbaugh with Sharon Moore. Sorry, excuse me. And you have Penn State that's obviously going to be in the mix too. So my question for you is, where does Washington fall in this pecking order in this new look Big Ten?
That's a really fantastic question, where I think that their top 6 is just kind of the absolute worst that you can put them at this point in time. Maybe 7 when you think about what USC is doing. And of course, they're a little bit more established with a couple more guys coming back. Losing Caleb Williams doesn't help anything, but they're putting together, it seems like Lincoln Riley finally flipped the switch of, I can't just ride this thing out with Alex Grinch, as much to my dismay as the world's #1 Alex Grinch hater. But I think that Washington can be no worse than 6th or 7th this year, and with a lot of potential to move up. And the biggest thing where that's going to come down to for me, as I look at where this team is right now and where they could be in, let's just say, the end of June, is going to be along the offensive line, where obviously Washington won the Joe Moore Award last year and then now has to replace all 5 starters with Troy Fautano and Roger Rosengarten going to the NFL draft. We saw Parker Brailsford follow Kalen DeBoer to Alabama, and then Nate Kalepo and Julius Buelow both chose to transfer to Ole Miss for their final season. So Washington is having a little bit of trouble. I don't want to actually, trouble isn't really the right term for it.
It's a question mark.
It's definitely a question mark, where there's a lot of exciting pieces, where Drew Azzopardi, the San Diego State transfer, I think he's going to be fantastic at left tackle. And then I wouldn't be surprised if Gard Memolar, who honestly probably would have been one of the starters last season, but he got hurt in August towards the end of fall camp. He's probably going to be back by the time the season starts. Landon Hatchett, I'm not sure what his status is going to be for the season. He got hurt during bowl prep and is probably going to be out through the start of the season at the very least with what was a knee injury. And then as we kind of look at some of the guys that might be going into the portal just throughout spring ball, I'm really intrigued to see what they end up doing with a couple of SMU transfers in Branson Hickman and Marcus Bryant, where I think those are 2 names that Washington is going to be keeping a very close eye on. And if both of them end up coming up to Montlake for one season, Hickman's a really good center. You can throw Bryant at right tackle. And then all of a sudden, this offensive line gets really, really shored up. And that's one of the reasons that Jedd Fisch pushed spring practice out so late, was because he wanted to make sure he could figure out a few more things along the offensive line. And they've got a bunch of talented guys that Scott Huff brought in before, now obviously with the Seattle Seahawks, in Elijah Jaquette, Kaylee Tafai, Sione Fasolo, and then Paki Finau as well, 4-star freshman, where Jedd Fisch is not afraid to play freshmen along the offensive line, contrary to 100 years of college football has to say. And, so I think that there's a lot of room for improvement there, and we're going to be talking about their offensive line in a very different light than we are right now come the end of May.
I think Washington is one of those schools that you're probably going to see, correct me if I'm wrong, but be pretty active in the spring portal window, absolutely. Because the timing of DeBoer's departure, it couldn't have come at a worse time. And you saw for a while, it was just Washington, Michigan, Alabama, Arizona. Those were the only dudes in the portal. They were just dominating the storyline. So we'll keep a close eye on Washington and what they're going to be doing from a player acquisition standpoint. And I think one of the cool things to pick your brain about is just how Washington goes about. I almost said Oregon. How Washington goes about. I'm just totally in that habit because that's the team that I eat, sleep, and breathe.
Hey, it's fair.
But how Washington goes about producing all of this production and talent that they lost, because I know my listeners and my readers and fans won't like to hear me say this, but I loved watching Michael Penix play. I loved watching those wide receivers, Rome Odunze, even if it came at the hands of 3 Oregon losses by 3 points. But case in point here, Roman, you had a phenomenal team in Washington in 2024. Just kind of wanted to get a little bit more about kind of what you think about the talent that they have in the fold now, because Will Rogers comes over from Mississippi State to presumably take over that quarterback position. So you kind of figure like you have that question answered. But just let's talk a little bit about maybe Will Rogers and some of these players that you're excited about in 24.
Yeah, absolutely. So I love Will Rogers. I think he's going to be awesome. But for me personally, the number one transfer that I'm the most excited about is Cal wide receiver Jeremiah Hunter, where I think he's going to immediately step into that wide receiver 1 role that Roma Odunze filled last year. And on a team where, Jeremy Bernard goes to Alabama, I talked a little bit about Denzel Boston earlier on. I think he's going to step into a much bigger role this year. But I think Jeremiah Hunter was somebody who is going to be a huge part of, even if it's Kalen DeBoer and Ryan Grubb still around, and obviously being able to retain him is a huge factor there. They did a really good job in getting him back. Kevin Cummings, the wide receivers coach, did a really good job getting Jeremiah to reaffirm his commitment to Washington. And he's somebody where I'm keeping a really close eye on him because I think that he can easily go for 1,000 yards this upcoming season, where there are a lot of question marks around him, but Will Rogers is going to turn to him time and time and time again. And just from watching what he's able to do at Cal with some subpar quarterback play, I think that he's going to just light up in this scheme. And I don't want to say it'll be what Tyrone McMillan did at Arizona, but it'll be in that similar mold where I think they're going to ask him to do a lot of those same things. And he's the perfect kind of guy to excel in that. And then with Will Rogers, this does seem like a really nice scheme fit for him, where there's going to be a lot of guys are going to be spread out. He's going to be able to throw the ball all over the place, and he's not going to throw it 900 times. I feel like he did every single season at Mississippi State, but he's going to throw the ball a lot, and he's got 2 really, really good running backs in Cameron Davis and Jonah Coleman. So as long as they can figure out the offensive line with a couple more of those solid transfers, the offense is going to look really good. My questions lie more on the defensive side because there are a couple returning starters. Cameron Fabiculanen coming back at safety. He started a couple games last season.
You're crushing these names, man. Like,
thank
I'm
you,
sorry,
thank you.
I want to cut you off.
No,
but, like,
please.
I don't know the roster like you do, but like, I feel like there have been a lot of tricky names that would probably trip me up, and you're just boom, 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 just crushing it.
See, I know I've been covering this team long enough where I can type them out without looking now at this point. And that's where it's like, oh, wow, I can spell Latuli Gassanoa without looking down at my keyboard. Yeah, I might need to take a day off.
Cool, but keep it going.
So Carson Bruner is probably the number 1 name that I'm going to be looking at this season in terms of returners, where at inside linebacker, he really stepped up last year in a couple of games and was just lighting it up down the stretch. Edifani Lefosio gave him a nice shout out at the combine. And then Elijah Jackson is probably going to step into a starting role. Continue in his starting role on the outside. Devon Banks is the guy who I'm looking to step up into another starting role, where he was awesome last season before he got taken out for the season after an injury in the Tulsa game really early on. So I'm really intrigued by the back end. And then where I'm looking is up front. Washington is replacing all 4 starters along the defensive line. And they brought in a couple nice transfers. Isaiah Ward and Russell Davis from Arizona are 2 really promising edge rushers. And then we'll see what Zach Durfee looks like in a full season after, not having to deal with, I'll just say, the NCAA, because that's the easiest way to explain what happened with him last season. And then, a couple other just guys in Voy Tanufi, who's really productive wherever he lines up, whether it's defensive tackle, edge rusher, you could probably line him up at inside linebacker. And then Lance Holtzclaw is a guy who I'm really looking to step into a bigger role this season. I got to talk to him a couple of weeks ago, and it seems like he's really going to thrive in just the edge role that Steve Belichick asks his guys to play, where, is a guy where he said that a lot of coaches and scouts have compared him to Josh Uche. And he was like, yeah, it's really cool, where that's what Jason Kafusi called me when he was recruiting me at Arizona. And that's who Steve Belichick obviously coached through some of his time in New England. So being able to step into that same role and just, work with so many guys who have gotten to that high level, he's somebody that I really expect with his combination of size, speed, and athleticism to really thrive in this scheme this upcoming year.
Good to get a little feel for where you're at, Roman, with some of these players to keep an eye on in 2024 with a roster that's going to look noticeably different from a season ago. Funny enough, we were texting yesterday when I was at the Elite 11. I've actually spent a pretty decent amount of time around some Washington or future Washington quarterbacks of late. Damon Williams out of Arizona, Basha High School. I covered him. I saw him at the Adidas All-American Bowl. And he it felt like single-handedly kept the East in that game. I think he had 3 or 4 touchdowns,
He
and
was
one of them was
really
really
impressive.
late.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a huge Damon Williams fan. He was formerly committed to Fisch at Arizona, so he follows him to Seattle. And then you have Dash Beerley, the new modern day quarterback, who transfers in from Chaparral out in the Temecula area, I want to say it was.
Yep.
So I got to see him at the Elite 11 yesterday, and he looked great. But the last thing I kind of wanted to hit on here, we're already at 30 minutes, is just kind of what we're thinking early on about this Oregon-Washington matchup in 2024. Yeah. And, it's only March 18th as we're talking about this. So premature would be an understatement. But it's kind of cool the way the schedule works out, man, because Washington and Oregon are playing to close the regular season.
Yeah.
That's kind of what Oregon's typically done. They just usually have Oregon State. They're going to get bumped up to the beginning of the schedule, but it's Oregon-Washington 2024 in Eugene at Autzen Stadium. I tend to think that Oregon's probably going to have the early edge, but we don't know what they're going to look like just yet because they haven't played a game in 2024. But I think they have a lot more continuity, chemistry, and you just have a little bit more confidence probably in what they're going to ultimately look like by the time they hit the field. So I got to make sure I kick it over to you. What are your early thoughts on this matchup?
Yeah, I would be surprised if Oregon wasn't favored at this point in time, where it's everything you said, right? It's the continuity where, both teams are replacing their quarterbacks, but Washington's replacing just a slight bit more, we can call it, just a little bit more than Oregon is in terms of returning production. And I like everything that Dan Lanning's done on that defense. They've done a really good job on the recruiting trail. And I'm really, really intrigued by what Jedd Fisch is building at Washington. Both Lars and I over on Locked On Huskies have been for a very long time saying 8-4, 9-3 is not out of the realm of possibilities for this Washington team. But it's probably going to start really hot where they could start 5-0 with a really easy start to the schedule. And then that's where it's going to get challenging. And I have full confidence in Jedd Fisch. I think he's a tremendous coach and is going to do a really, really good job with this team. But the one, it's going to be really, really difficult to go down into Eugene, replacing 20 of 22 starters from last year's team and win. And we'll see obviously what that looks like come October, come November. But the best thing about just this matchup this year is exactly what you said, Max. The fact that we get to wait all season for it. There's a bye week beforehand. So neither team can complain about coming off a short week or, they had a bye leading up to it and the other team didn't. This sucks, which I know is something we've seen in the past. But the fact that the Big Ten has done everything in its power to not only protect this rivalry, but do everything in its power to make sure that it's the best possible game is probably my favorite part about what we're going to see from that game this upcoming year.
I didn't even know about the bye that you mentioned. I knew that the schedule kind of laid out that it was going to be at the end of the season. So that's a great point. And I think even to further that, just where it falls on the schedule, even with a bye, both teams could be banged up at that point. It's a long road through the Big Ten. But I'm super stoked for that game. I think it's right after Thanksgiving, so it might be kind of hard to get up there for that one. But I know I want to be in Eugene for that Ohio State game. I was there the last time the two teams played in the shoe in Columbus, and it was phenomenal. But man, yeah, it's gonna be fun to see what these teams look like in 2024. So before we get out of here, Roman, just wanted to give you a chance. Let the people know where they can find you and all the awesome work that you have going on in this space.
Oh, I appreciate that. Yeah, of course. So you can find our podcast, Locked On Huskies, over on YouTube or wherever else you get your podcasts. We update it 5 times a week. So, there's always something there. And, Oregon fans, if you want to come over and just say whatever in the comments, we love it. We just appreciate the banter back and forth. Please, we insist. Just make sure you hit that subscribe button. And then, as you said, I'm over with Huskies Wire as part of the USA Today Sports Media Group. And you can find all our written work over at uwhuskieswire.usatoday.com. I've got an amazing team of writers over there, and we are putting out so much new content every single day just to make sure that everybody is up to date in the latest, just all around Husky athletics. So yeah, please feel free to make sure you check all that out.
Right on, right on. Well, make sure you guys tap in with Roman. I mean, we're always here for the discussion, whether it's Oregon, UW, college football at large. College football is changing, man. So there is no shortage of things to talk about. If you guys want to find more of me, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at mtorresports. That name right there on your screen. You can subscribe to my YouTube channel at Oregon Football Max Torres. Drop me a comment. Let me know what you're thinking. And you can also read me over on ducksdigest.com. But make sure you share the show because I'm really trying to ramp it up and just take it to the next level, just in the process of figuring out what that next level is. But a big thank you to Roman for coming on, and a big thank you to you guys for tuning in to the latest episode. And we'll see you in the next episode of the Ducks Dish Podcast.